day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to that epic crossover that you've all been waiting for. Otherwise known as a Warframe and an Outriders video? Warframe, a game I played for literally 6 years as a full-time job, a game that has set the pace for the sci-fi loot shooter genre, a game that over time has evolved to be one of the most notable free-to-play games on the internet. Now, however, we have Outriders, which has come into the scene, and a lot of people are either asking, is it better than Warframe? Or, oh my god, it's a Warframe clone. Or, my favorite, why is Makari so sexy? Well, in this video, we're going to compare, analyze, and assess both of these games so we can get an understanding of what to expect and whether a new entry into the genre we all love so much is going to be worth your time or not, or whether you'll just stick to Warframe. Also, Outriders is going to be a big thing on this channel, so what better way to start our videos for it than with a comparison to a game that literally ate up the better part of my life. Let's start by briefly summarizing the games and move on to a direct comparison, shall we? Bearing in mind, when looking at Outriders, all comments are made based on what is currently available, and at the end of the day, beta is beta and things from Outriders are subject to change. Warframe, released to the public in March of 2013. Warframe has seen huge success over its several years circling the internet as a third-person, over-the-shoulder sci-fi looter shooter that helps set the genre on its feet in the early days of the internet, showing that both sci-fi and free-to-play do work hand in hand, even after being told in its early days that it would fail by its potential backers. Warframe's history is vibrant and a testament to the nature of the betterment of gaming. Whether that's in question these days or not is kind of up to your personal judgment, but no one can deny the impact Warframe has had on gaming as a whole, with its wholesome dev streams focusing on community and gameplay that has evolved by community feedback, as well as a gameplay experience that would only rival that of AAA developers, which is scary considering it's a free-to-play game. Warframe runs on an engine called the Evolution Engine. This, having been made by DE themselves, has meant they've had a lot of opportunities to fiddle with the chemistry of a game on a fundamental level like no other developer could. All of this then resulting in a game that plays like no other and looks like no other. Warframe pits you as a Tenno, a gifted individual powered by what is called the Void, in an ever-changing, ever-dynamic, and ever-evolving universe where everything wants to murder you horribly. As a Tenno, you have the ability to pilot what is known as Warframes, these Warframes acting as avatars of your character, pitting you with immense power and abilities like no other, with a variety of weapons that would make even Borderlands blush. The gameplay is satisfying and gritty, relying on weighty melee weapons, fantastical ranged weapons, all in the venture of pushing the envelope of personal power fantasy. Warframe has always been a game with community at heart. Again, although that may be in question these days, that's not really the point of this video. Community and easy entry-level fun have always been Warframe's biggest selling points, usually topping the charts of Steam's free-to-play category and enamoring thousands of players a month with super bondage ninja space pirate action? All of this culminating in a game that anyone can pick up for any length of time and get some decent fun out of. Outriders, a game that seems to have sprung up out of nowhere and captivated fans from multiple sci-fi franchises alike, and is set to make a big splash in the coming year with an expected free demo coming in February and a full release as of April the 1st. Outriders started development as far back as 2015 by developers People Can Fly, and was picked up by publishers Square Enix in 2018. Since then, development has skyrocketed forward with weekly updates to their YouTube channels, in which debuting upcoming features, news in regards to everything going on in the game, and many more things to help the community understand what's going on. People Can Fly, showing early on through their dev streams and interviews that community is key. Using this mantra, they would constantly push home that they weren't about to make the same mistakes their rivals had been making. Whether this ends up being true or not, we'll and polish them dramatically, injecting its own flair into them. You can see this in the similar damage type perspective system that they have incorporated that looks a bit similar to that of the Divisions, but what Outrider does to excel that is to then offer customization of everything in your perspective and UI. That then increasing the graphical fidelity and personal fantasy of what you're experiencing. That just being one of the examples of the ways People Can Fly have learned from other developers and then incorporated what they've learned to make it their own. Now, that's not to say that everything is copied. At the end of the day, there isn't a game that's been released in the last 20 years that can truly vouch for being original. Every game in this day and age takes inspiration from what has come before. The important notion is how it innovates that inspiration. Outriders aims to provide a very atmospheric and immersive experience, where every shot fired resonates to your ballsack, where every ability is an experience and makes a big difference based on your strategic use of said ability in a scenario. Coupling that with a very unique art style, a gritty and gory blood system that would make even Duke Nukem cringe, we can see why this game might be a potential for up-and-coming sci-fi lovers to sink their teeth into. Now that we've had a general look at both of these games, we're going to break each of these games down to their main components and look how they stand up against each other, focusing on elements that I feel make for the most compelling reasons why you'd want to play these games in the first place. These main points then being the storyline, and then replay value, which includes things such as endgame and the overall gameplay loop, and then style. There are, of course, more things that can go into this, but I think these are the ones that we'll compare up most notably. Story. The narrative of any game is often the first thing a player is going to experience when we set out in our sci-fi loot shooters, and often sets the tempo and expectations of what is to come. Although story isn't just about the plot or what is put in front of you, it's about how it's presented and whether we really feel invested enough to immerse ourselves in that universe for when we reach the later stages. Warframe's plot? Oh boy. If you ask 5 random people at DEHQ what Warframe's plot is, not one of them would probably give you the same answer. But is this a bad thing? Warframe has been around for a long time, so it's not a surprise that the plot has developed and evolved as the studio has. Warframe's narrative is told in a rather non-traditional fashion, whereas in most games they'll sort of lead you through the narrative in a diegetic nature, going from A to B to C and such like. Warframe gives you an initial introduction to the game's world and what you are by introducing you to some kinky bondage play through the Vor's questline. But then, once that initial tutorial quest is done, you're left completely to your own devices, allowing you to choose at your leisure whether you follow the quests further or whether you do whatever else your heart is set on. Warframe's quests are truly a moniker of the game's age. Comparing the quests you get at the start of the star chart by comparison to those that come at the end, there is a stark difference in general storytelling and structure, as well as general quality of the production work therein. That isn't necessarily to say that this is a bad thing, but it is to say that Warframe's story is kind of one of its weak spots. It's like putting on a fancy party, inviting everybody around, and then all of a sudden dancing naked for the first hour until everybody decides to leave, only to then reveal that everyone who did stay gets $1 million. Yeah, that analogy kind of worked in my mind, but still, the point being is, Warframe's story is amazing. It's fantastic, it's broad, it's as wide as an ocean, just as deep as a puddle. Outriders, however, is about as much of a modern narrative experience as you're going to get. You start at the beginning and you then get ferried through the game in a rather on-the-rails fashion, rather cyclically. Although along that journey, you are given many branching paths to offer up side missions and alternative storylines that you can follow. These then offer for extra gear and XP and such like, which certainly helps a player's initial experience that helps them immerse themselves within the world whilst feeling there's purpose to everything they're doing. Speaking of that diegetic nature of storytelling, the diegetic nature of the story in Outriders tends to lend itself to a more modern audience, as the last thing you want to be doing is having to Google or guess where the next story mission is, or how to start it. That completely ruins my immersion. Not to say that Warframe's way of doing it is wrong, but it certainly doesn't lend itself to a more modern audience that would want things to be a bit more straightforward. Everyone has their tastes, I suppose. It may have been fine years ago, when there weren't billions of other systems bogging you down in Warframe, but now Warframe's quests tend to get washed out by everything else going on and all the other systems washing it away. Outriders' narrative is as about an atypical of an sci-fi narrative as you're going to get. You are X character that has been sent as a colonization scheme to X planet, which in this case is Enoch. Once you arrive at said planet, things go awry and you are gifted powers by an anomaly called, well, the Anomaly. The Anomaly has gifted you magical powers with which you will be smiting the enemies of the planet. You will fight alongside other humanoids. You will fight other humanoids that have gone mischievous. These then pit you against the inhabitants of the planet, the animals of the planet, and everything therein. In my eyes, both Warframe and Outriders both have very well-established plots. Of course, with Warframe, it's got the time-honored favor of having been around for a long period of time, whereas Outriders is still fresh out the box. But the fact that both of these games have very well-established universes and are pushing the envelope in regards to how it tells that story is the most notable factor. Storytelling is very important with sci-fi games, and neither of these games do it necessarily that badly. There are certainly some areas that each of them will favor in more. For example, Warframe tries to encourage more of a systems-based experience, whereas Outriders is going to be pushing the narrative through every system in of itself. So whichever one you end up enjoying is kind of a personal preference. It's just, as with most sci-fi games, we like the aliens. Replay value honestly comes up as probably one of the biggest priorities for any live service type game. This comprises of many different things, ranging from what there is to do once you hit max level, are there alternative ways to play the game, and what's the end game gameplay loop going to be for those who want to play once everything is said and done. For a sci-fi loot shooter, that bases itself on an ever-expanding live service business model. This is usually the forefront of a developer's mind, as it helps set out whether the game will have any longevity beyond the initial once through. As we've seen from Warframe, you don't necessarily need a decisive endgame or flashy raid boss to make valid replay value. Although, raid bosses do help. Can we have our raids back, please? Steve? DE? Anyone? Warframe's replay value comes from a variety of different things, and variety honestly explains much of Warframe's positives. With a satisfying combat system and gameplay loop built around almost a Path of Exile-style loot scooting, it's no wonder why people can literally delve hundreds upon hundreds of hours into Warframe. Within Warframe itself, there are several things you'll find yourself doing that are satisfying no matter how many times you do them or when you do them. The most notable being a completionist role, wherein you try to get everything. Or at least as much as the game has to offer anyway. And with how many frames, mods, upgrades, etc. there are, I mean, the list is really endless as to the stuff you can farm for. With all that said, it's not surprising you can literally lose yourself in Warframe within the first couple of hours of playing just because of how many things are being thrown in your general direction. Furthermore, you have the more intensive nature of the game where you go from a fresh-eyed Tenno to a grizzled veteran, learning the ins and outs of modding, how power scaling functions, bettering yourself through personal customization of your setup, and pushing for those bigger challenges such as long-winded endurance runs and the such like. That's not to then mention the atypical content of farming for primes, making platinum, rolling ribbons, playing the in-game stock market. That's not to mention then the cosmetics that go into it as well, which we all know are the true endgame. Suffice to say, Warframe is not without a lot of things to keep you entertained. To then compare that to Outriders. Outriders takes the concept of replayability and makes it the forefront focus through every one of its systems. Having learnt from lackluster endgame cycles from things like Destiny, where the cycle just ends up being monotonous daily quests that have no real substance to them, Outriders boasts the aforementioned replayability through a lot of different things. The one you will find the earliest is the difficulty scaling, which allows the game to scale difficulty based on however you so choose, and that metric can be adjusted based on how much challenge you want to give yourself. Difficulty is often one of the most defining factors as to whether somebody can enjoy a game or whether they get put off entirely. So the fact that it is so customizable ends up being the crux of what makes Outriders quite replayable. As of right now, we know that Outriders' endgame is quite ambitious, but also quite hard to quantify due to the fact the game hasn't actually been released yet. So what we're going on is what we've seen through dev streams and videos on Outriders' YouTube channel. So what we do know is the following. A typical gameplay loop will revolve around your typical dailies that you'd see from other games. This then will vary based on the setup and chosen difficulty, offering material rewards to boost yourself and give goals to earn towards to help that end game power creep. But realistically, that's nothing new. This is sort of what we expect from most sci-fi or loot shooter type games in the first place. Outriders aims for its end game is a fine balance between hardcore challenge modes called expeditions. These act as the super challenge endgame with infinite scalability, allowing you to push yourself as far as you deem fit, which in turn is also one of the biggest boons to Outriders, the act of playing the way you want to. And no matter which way you choose, there's always fun to be had because there's always active rewards for the level of investment you put in. And in my eyes is probably the biggest selling point to Outriders. So with the mixture of endgame expeditions for farming those endgame materials to boost your power, crafting, fashion, what else is there? Well, similar to Warframe, Outriders boasts customization of your power fantasy. Each class boasts a spec tree that makes even classic WoW players' spec tree feel a little bit envious. This helping to reinforce that custom experience notation we were talking about earlier. But whereas the replayability for Warframe changes based on your mods and frames, Outriders changes the experience based on your orientation of abilities, and then that changes exponentially based on your spec you go for. The customization for both of these games is infinitesimal, and something both games seem to excel deeply at. but in my eyes, the one that will kind of excel more so would be Outriders, specifically because of the type of impact each of your decisions will make. Whereas in Warframe, although the style of play you have is defined by the Warframe you choose, most of the time it ends up devolving down to who can spam the most abilities or who can spam the melee button the quickest. Therein, the style you play kind of becomes a bit meaningless. And that does bring us to our final point, which is style. Style is important for many different reasons. It's what sells the game to their respective audiences. It's what draws the new players in and makes the existing players feel immersed in their universe. Style, in the context of our games here, comes down to the visual aesthetic and general feel of play within the gameplay loop. So, which of these games does it better? Warframe's overarching style is most notably thanks to their own homegrown engine and years of experience on the developers' part working on other titles such as Unreal Tournament. These themes and styles have led to one of the most unique looking games out there. And again, you look at the sheer level of detail in some of the worlds and models, and you wonder how this game could possibly be free. All this then leads to a sense of gameplay that isn't quite like anything else on the market. Weighty attacks, thunder, and echo with each strike, ripples of energy as your Warframe casts spells. Visually, they are fantastic. However, this does come at a cost. Due to the mechanical style of the game, all the visual and audio fidelity does end up getting washed down by the general lethargy within the AI and combat system and the way it's presented when you end up mashing yourself against enemies that just don't die because they're bullet sponges. Although Warframe has style in droves, nothing in Warframe feels meaningful. Yes, performing a big melee attack feels great, but when you get a higher level enemy you've just dealt 500,000 damage to, and that enemy then just shrugs it off because of the way scalability works, all that oomph, all that immersive nature the game worked so well at the start of your experience with tends to get a bit diluted. And that's, I suppose, could be said about any loot shooter, but it's about understanding where that chemistry lies and making it still feel satisfying. And all that style goes to waste when you have an issue such as Warframe's, which has been compounded by the fact that the game has fallen into a meta of being very melee-centric. So eventually, everything all boils down to mashing E, rather than utilizing all those caringly crafted ranged weapons that just look so spectacular, but never really hold a candle to your melee weapon. Now, nitpicking aside, Warframe is a beautiful game. The majority of players will never see this minor nitpicks that we're talking about, and for those who do, it likely won't matter, as the type of gameplay loop Warframe has makes any of that with which we've just been talking about a small price to pay for having a free-to-play game that you can unleash years of pent-up aggression on. Style-wise for Outriders, we can only really speculate as to where it's going to go style-wise, but what we do see as of right now is that People Can Fly are putting a very heavy weight on tactical combat. Whereas Warframe relies on spam, spam, spam and abilities flying everywhere, Outriders encourages a style of combat where, depending on difficulty, you're going to be more and more reliant on strategic and synergistic usage of abilities with your team and also placement. This in turn makes every ability feel important. It makes your positioning and team play meaningful, and will likely win out over any game that relies on just visual fidelity alone to counterweigh their lacking gameplay. Thankfully, Outriders doesn't just have a stylistic type of combat, it also does then have a unique style in of itself, which we've seen through the demonstration of the different legendary skins and different outfit types of gear that you can get through the dev streams and also the YouTube videos that have been released recently. The style-wise is not too dissimilar to a mashup between Destiny and Division, but adding in that little spark of its own unique chemistry. At the end of the day, as we mentioned earlier, innovation is key, and when something works, why not use it and just innovate upon it? What ain't broke, don't fix. The environments and world building within the world of Enoch and the universe that has been established are staggering, showing similar aesthetical designs to their previous game, Bulletstorm. Oh yeah, did I mention that these guys made Bulletstorm? They made Bulletstorm. Suffice it to say, Outriders has a lot running for it, and I think this is where the dichotomy lies. Whereas Warframe has a well-established universe, has had years and years to show off its goods, Outriders is just starting, and what Outriders has shown already is very promising. So that's the general comparison from my point of view. Yes, there are some things I could have added in there, but at the end of the day, I think the only thing that truly matters that will make the difference between which of these two games you'll play is gonna be the fact that one is free to play and one isn't. Both of these games are so unique to their own ends that somebody who likes Warframe is definitely not gonna like Outriders, and some people who like Outriders are definitely not gonna like Warframe. what I would like to preface here is that you can like both. There is never a bad thing of having two games in the same genre, because when one game in a genre does well, all of the other games of that genre do well as well. To see it this way, people who get into playing Outriders are going to benefit Warframe in such a manner. They'll pick up Outriders, they'll maybe not like its style, and then they'll think, what's another sci-fi loot shooter that I can give a try? And then they'll see Warframe, a free-to-play alternative. So let's support and encourage these kind of games. Let's support and encourage the growth of both, because there's always room in the sci-fi loot shooter genre for both of these kind of styles. And we need to see innovation. We need to see games pushing each other forwards to encourage betterment of the style. I suppose this has all been a very roundabout way of saying which game is better. I don't know. You guys decide. At the end of the day, guys, let's have fun with both. Both of these games have a lot of positives and some negatives to each of them. Make it your own decision. Take from my videos what you will and use that to base your decisions on. We can enjoy both games and have fun in the process. So let me know down in the comments, guys, which of these games are you looking forward to? Are you looking forward to the up-and-coming nature of Outriders? Are you looking forward to Warframe proving themselves more so in the future? How do you think the Outriders is going to go? I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments, guys. So please leave a comment down below. If you like this video, please like it, and you will be seeing plenty more Outriders content from me in the future. If you want to drop by and join the recording of these videos, there'll be a link down in the comments as well, in the description down below. And yeah, do all that stuff that YouTube encourages you to, and I'll hopefully see all of you top hatters in the next video. Ta-ra!